Welcome to this discussion with Advocate Erin Richards. This is the first in a number of discussions we're going to have discussing all things state capture over the coming months. So head over to Biz News' YouTube channel to stay up to date with the latest discussions and other interviews that we've done. Erin, welcome. It's the first time that I've had an opportunity to interview you. Thanks for coming through to our studios.
Fantastic to be here. Thanks, Mike.
Before we get into why you're here, which is to discuss an opinion piece you've written, it's up on biznews.com. Go check that out. Before we get into the contents of the op-ed piece, for somebody who doesn't watch the news and doesn't know who or what Bain and Company is and what two commissions of inquiry have found them to be implicated in, just lay that foundation for us.
Mike, very simply, without going into too much unnecessary detail, we're all au fait with the extent to which state capture has grasped this country. And long story short, Bain has been seriously implicated in that state capture. Specifically, the focus to date has been on its work at SARS. It consulted at SARS for a period of roughly 27 months between 2015 and 2017. And during that time, there was basically a wholesale destruction of SARS, including the entire wholesale decimation of its enforcement units that focused on organized crime. So we've had two commissions of inquiry, first the Nugent Commission and now the State Capture Commission, that have seriously implicated Bain in state capture.
Great. Now let's get to your piece. So you have written and opined asking the question whether there is a link between Bain and Company, their capture of SARS, and the possible advancement of the illicit economy or organized crime. That's quite something to venture. That's quite a space to venture into. What sparked this idea?
Mike, look, in all honesty, it wasn't a comfortable piece for me to write. But while I was reading Athol Williams' testimony, I came across evidence of an email chain dated 2015 that basically was setting up a meeting between senior South African police officials, Interpol, senior Italian police officials, our Minister of Police, and representatives from Beretta, the firearms company. Now, obviously, Bain was the one organizing that meeting. And that really grabbed my attention, and it's got me asking what I think are some very serious and important questions. And I always found it curious that when Bain was consulting to SARS, one of the hallmarks of that period was the wholesale destruction of SARS's enforcement units. And I'd never really understood that. Why was it? Why was there this necessity, this extreme pursuit of destroying SARS's enforcement units? And when I read those emails, I just wondered if there might have been a connection between illicit trade and organized crime being pursued by Bain and this destruction of SARS's enforcement units. So that's what got it started.
How did these emails come to light?
Well, there are one of two options, and I'm not entirely sure which one it is. Here's what happened. After the Nugent Commission, which first implicated Bain did two things. First, it asked Athol Williams to come and perform basically an ethical oversight role in the organization, and it contracted Baker McKenzie to do an investigation into its work with SARS. Now, the documents, these emails, either came from Bain and were given to Athol, or they came from Baker McKenzie and were given to Athol. But just not to put too fine a point on it, we don't know, we haven't been able to verify these emails yet, and they weren't unfortunately properly interrogated in the Zondo Commission. So just so your audience knows, we're working on the assumption that these are legitimate emails, but that legitimacy hasn't been tested yet.
It hasn't been tested, but it also hasn't been challenged. And that's an important point to make.
Yes, very much. And thank you for that. I mean, if we look at the State Capture Commission, Bain initially wanted to cross-examine Athol Williams when he gave his testimony after blowing the whistle. Then Bain was told by the Zondo Commission that they were welcome to cross-examine Athol Williams, but that then they would also have to put their version in front of the commission. And after they were told that, they withdrew their application to cross-examine. And so we have not actually had Bain's side of the story here.
I want to take us to one line in the emails and get your response and your thoughts on that. Now, who's speaking here is Vittorio Massone. He was one of the Bain SA partners. And he's writing to Beretta, the Italian arms manufacturer's Dr. Micheletti. Quote, I am only an intermediary, and these gentlemen are very structured and diligent. Isn't it nice to know that? Right now, they are also obsessed with wiretapping. It's been a year trying to take out the commissioner. Now, the commissioner at the time, in September 2015, was Ria Piecha. Just by chance or happenstance, she would be suspended a month later, and that is assuming that this meeting takes place, but that is a concerning line. Quote, it has been a year trying to take out the commissioner. And if you look at the timeline, at the time, that's Ria Piecha. Is that a worrying line to you?
Look, there are many, many worrying things about this meeting and the email chains, and that's certainly one of them. You know, firstly, this reference to wiretapping is suspect. If you're not doing anything illegal or anything shady, why are you worried about wiretapping? Second, this reference to the commissioner at the time, who, as you point out, was subsequently suspended. That indicates that Bain has inside knowledge that it shouldn't have. So the fact that this entire discussion was even happening is highly irregular and raises very many questions.
Yeah. So who would take Ria Piecha's spot as acting National Police Commissioner would be a gentleman called Khomotso Pakhlane. He comes in after Piecha. He himself gets suspended in 2017 for misconduct. So, yeah, we have no shortage of people being suspended in South Africa. And
certainly not.
That police commissioner role seems to be like a poison chalice for many.
Yes.
Another line that stands out to me is, once again, Massone writing to Beretta. And he says, one of the important terms is public order policing, and the issue of non-lethal weapons is very important to position Beretta. They have received specific instructions from the president to withdraw and replace the RS. Now, the RS200 or RS202 is a shotgun. Are we talking about President Jacob Zuma here, do you think?
It certainly seems that way. I'm not sure which other president we would be referring to. But this to me is very concerning, because essentially what's being discussed here is some kind of procurement. Okay, so it looks like there was at some point a policy decision to move away from lethal weapons to possibly less lethal or non-lethal weapons. And that's why there is this phrase by Massone where he says that Beretta should position itself around non-lethal firearms. So essentially what you've got here is Beretta coming in to have a discussion, it looks like, with the minister at the time about a procurement issue. Now, that is highly irregular. Ministers don't get involved in procurement. Procurement happens through procurement officers at the various departments and SOEs. So this is fertile ground for corruption, is when you start having ministers meeting with people like firearms traders. Concerning.
The Sheraton Hotel in Pretoria, that was to be the venue described in these emails. If you're having all these law enforcement bigwigs, Interpol officers, the Minister of Police, they're not going to be going to the Sheraton Hotel if it's like an official meeting, are they? Yeah.
No, well, I certainly wouldn't think so, but it also strikes me as somewhat odd that they would be doing this so publicly anyway. And along those lines, we don't know at this point whether or not that meeting actually happened. It certainly looks from the emails as though it did, because these emails unfolded on the 7th to the 18th of September 2015, and the meeting was supposed to be on the 30th. And we see them discussing hotels, we see them discussing flights. So it certainly looks as though this meeting happens. But I agree, Sheraton is a strange place to be doing it.
Just to point out, we have reached out to one of the parties named in the emails, and he has absolutely no recollection of such a meeting ever taking place. He is certainly one of the people who is named as the contact person by Bain. Get in touch with Mr. Molati Moremi, who was head of stakeholder relations in the police ministry, I reached out to him and I said, have you ever had anybody from Bain contact you? What was this meeting all about? Did it occur? Not exactly pleading the fifth, but I cannot recall, was the response there.
Yes, and I always love those responses because it's not an admission, but it's also not a denial.
Yeah. So now on Monday, Lord Peter Hain, he writes an opinion piece. It gets carried by the Financial Times, a very influential publication in Europe at least, and he calls on the UK government, the US government, to cut ties, to freeze out Bain because of the findings from both the Nugent and the state capture inquiry. And he wants the US, because it's a Boston-based company, even though they are global, to withdraw the license from Bain to operate. Is that, what do you think of Lord Hain's calls in the Financial Times?
I think it's extremely necessary, and I wish that there was more similar action actually happening in South Africa. There was more boycotting of Bain. Essentially, what Lord Hain is doing is he's applying significant public pressure and international pressure to Bain. And South Africa, as the place where all of this malfeasance happened in the first place, should have been the first to hop on board that train. But unfortunately, we haven't seen that. You know, one would think that with the amount of evidence that's been brought forward by Bain's obfuscatory conduct, their clear non-compliance with our laws, with our constitution, one would have thought we would have seen a mass boycott. We would have seen people who had contracts with Bain finding lawful ways to withdraw from those contracts. We would have hoped to have seen people resigning from Bain South Africa, but instead we haven't. We've just carried on as normal, which I find concerning and honestly quite disappointing. So I'm very grateful to people like Lord Hain and Adv Williams who continue to raise that alarm bell internationally.
So here's an eye-watering figure for you that Lord Hain threw out yesterday in an interview with Alec Hogg, the editor here. He said that Bain had made £55 million from doing work for the British government over the last few years. He wasn't explicit about an exact time frame. But he says Bain continues to do work for the UK government, and that equals 1.14 trillion rand. Let's compare that to what the fees that Bain derived at the South African Revenue Service. Paltry, 167 million rand.
Well, here's something that also to me just makes very little sense. I mean, look, firstly, I don't think it was just 167. I think Bain has been, that was one project. You know, I suspect that Bain consults or has been consulting quite broadly across state entities and for a protracted period of time. So I think that there's significantly more money at play. And also, if we look at these emails and the meeting that we think might have happened and Bain's role, it also raises the question about whether or not there are illegitimate kickbacks that are being paid either to Bain or to its employees. So who knows how much of our money they've got.
Well, you speak about the possibility of them having done work at other state-owned entities or in government departments. Do we actually know where Bain has worked or where they are currently still working?
No, exactly. And this is a serious bone of contention for me, and it's something that drives me nuts. And it's why I always advocate for transparency. Give us the details. I mean, this is one of those moments where there should be full and frank disclosure about where Bain has worked 1994 onwards and where they are working now. Why is this information not forthcoming? Why is no one pushing for this? Why is Parliament not asking the questions? Why are the opposition parties not asking? I mean, it's an obvious question, and it is hugely important. And so this is why I'm so concerned about this email, because what we're seeing here is not the full picture. It's a microcosm of a macro situation. And the only reason we know about Bain and SARS is because Adv Williams had the courage to blow the whistle. So what we need to do is look at Bain. We need to interrogate and investigate as much as we can, work out what happened, work out the patterns of corruption that manifested, and then we need to start extrapolating. And we need to start looking at whether that has happened in other consulting firms, in other auditing firms, if there are pattern manifests in the banks, the law firms. Hopefully we will get whistleblowers coming out more frequently after Athel's kind of, lit the torch and led the way. But this is an opportunity. We need to not take a siloed approach and think that it's just Bain and just SARS, because I don't think it is. I think it's much deeper, much, much deeper than that. And we need to ask these questions.
Well, Adv Williams says it would work to Bain's advantage if you just cast the eye at SARS.
Well, that's one of Bain's angles. Bain's other angle is first look at SARS, and if you must look at us, look at one of our employees, Mr. Vittorio Massone. And whoops, sorry, but he went rogue, and it's not our fault. Bain is not corrupt. Maybe there was a problem with Massone. Sorry about that, but he's gone. Okay. Still consulting to a company that has offices in South Africa, but be that as it may. So Bain has adopted a strategy of epic deflection. And anyone who believes, given the evidence that we've seen, that the problem was one man, Mr. Vittorio Massone, it's not a viable proposition at all. It's clear from some of the contracts that Bain was concluding and the approval processes that those contracts had to go through, that those contracts, dodgy as they were, had to work their way up to international partners at Bain, senior management internationally at Bain. So people knew what was happening here and they signed off on it. And those issues need to be investigated. And then we need to take that and look at this meeting in the context of everything else that's unfolded.
Yeah, Adv Williams says Vittorio Massone was celebrated from Boston. You could hear the cheers because of all the money the man was generating for Bain through various projects. There was something called a President's Project, and that alluded to President Jacob Zuma. I want to ask you about, they've been found to be unscrupulous. The state capture inquiry said that many of their actions were unlawful. How do you deal with private sector companies like this? Do you cut them off at the knees? And I ask this in particular because if we look at Bell Pottinger and the immense harm that it did to South Africa, heinous campaigns it ran, immoral, you wouldn't be allowed to operate anymore. Their license was withdrawn and they have closed down. Should Bain's executives in Boston, including Mr. Massone, drag him out of Italy, put them before a court of law here, and then test this version and then make findings against him? Is that something that has to happen so that South Africa can get over this? Because Bain's mea culpa, it just doesn't seem to be enough.
Yeah. So, look, as for what we can do, there are numerous prongs to this answer. The first is what the state can do. Now, under South African law, you can prosecute a company and employees criminally. So we could do both. Technically, we could go after Bain, we could go after Massone, we could go after whoever else is implicated through these investigations at Bain. Obviously, if you're going to go after individuals like Vittorio Massone, you're going to have to use the Extradition Act to extradite him and bring him back to South Africa to face trial. But all of that would only happen after a very, very extensive investigation. And we don't even know at this point if that investigation is going to happen. It is a recommendation in the Zondo report. We'll see what the president's response to that is.
Okay, so I want to go over to Bain's statement because it is important to put their side across as well. They released a statement in the wake of the findings of the Nugent Commission, and a lot of it was a cut and paste job, to be honest. If you look at the very latest statement when they were deciding whether or not to be a member of Business Leadership South Africa.
Yeah.
So here it goes, quote, the Commission's hearings, and it's referring to Nugent here, and the final report published last week have laid bare the disarray in which SARS now finds itself, with both moral and performance severely damaged. Contributing to that outcome was not the intent of the Bain project, and we clearly made significant errors of judgment in taking on this work. As a firm, we have been shocked and saddened by our involvement with SARS. We let down our clients, our people, our alumni. Most of all, we've let you down, South Africa. We accept that through various lapses in leadership and governance, Bain South Africa became an unwitting participant in the process. that inflicted serious damage on South Africa. Heartfelt?
No. And my response to that is, yes, you have let South Africa down and you should bugger off. And if they don't want to, then we should kick them out. That should be our response. As much as we hope that law enforcement and the NPA do their investigations and pursue the prosecutions, we as South Africans also need to start standing up and saying, if we want to protect our constitution, if we want to protect an ethical society, then we need to act ethically. And part of that is, if you are associated with people like Bain, when you find out what they're up to, get them out, get rid of them. That's the second leg in our own personal responsibility that we all carry. As for whether that's heartfelt, no, I don't think it is. As for whether it's accurate, no, I don't think it is. I don't buy for a second that they are shocked and saddened by anything. This looks to me like it was intentional. And this potential meeting that may or may not have happened in 2015 also raises some very serious questions, because if it turns out that Bain or its employees were somehow profiting from organized crime, then it would make sense that they so ruthlessly pursued the destruction of SARS's enforcement units. So I don't buy for a single second that there was any lapse in judgment. To me, on the evidence that I've seen it, as it stands uncontradicted by Bain at this point in time, it seems to me that there's something far more dubious at play.
Well, let's just remind the person watching here that Bain was in contact with President Jacob Zuma and Tom Moyane far in advance of him becoming the SARS commissioner. Now, they had no business talking to Tom Moyane, but it seems that they had the inside track on who he was going to become, the position he was going to be appointed to, and they were just helping him figure out what he needed to do as part of a restructuring agenda when he became the boss there.
Correct.
So we're not thinking anything up here. This is not in the ether.
No.
This is all coming out of the commissions of inquiry.
Correct. And I mean the whole chain of events just speaks to coordination. Firstly, it's 2010 and Vittorio Masone arrives in South Africa. About a year and a half, 2 years later, he starts having multiple meetings with the president. And also Tom Moyane during the same period, although maybe a little bit later. But at the time of those meetings, there was no contract with the South African government in place. No reason at all for a consulting firm or partner at a consulting firm to be meeting with the president. And Adv Williams made this patently clear in his evidence. He said that he could think of no legitimate reason for such meetings, especially in the absence of any contract. And you're right, Bain seemed to know about Tom Moyane's appointment many months before he was actually given that appointment. So, if you start connecting the dots here, it becomes very difficult to believe that all of this was a lapse in judgment. What, did you meet the president out of a lapse of judgment? Did you not know that was irregular and that shouldn't be happening? Do you know that we have a constitution? Do you know that we have procurement laws? It just doesn't make sense. The version makes no sense at all.
Well, Bain had managed to hook a very big fish here under this president's project. And Mr. Masone wrote quite openly in his emails back to Boston about the progress he was making with former President Jacob Zuma. So when we speak about this particular email and the September 2015 meeting, whether or not it took place, where they referred to a president there, the only reasonable inference one can draw there is not the president of Beretta or the president of Business Leadership South Africa. It's the president of the Republic.
Correct. Yeah.
Have you had a chance to have a look at the opinion piece Adv Williams has written recently?
No, I haven't read it yet. I have seen that it's up on the website, but I haven't been able to go through it yet.
Perfect, because that's a very nice segue into how we end this. And that is, we are going to hope to get Adv Williams, the Bain whistleblower, on this program next week. And then the three of us can have a nice conversation. I want to end by quoting from Zondo's first report in relation to Bain. And it says, quote, "One of the few instances where President Zuma was himself directly and personally involved in the activities and plans to take over a government entity. And Bain's involvement is a clear example of how the private sector colluded on state capture." Erin Richards, thank you for joining me, and
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for watching.